Our next speaker is Professor Charlie Beckett. Professor Charlie Beckett is the founding director of Police, the think tank for the research and debate around international journalism and society in the Department of Media and Communications at London School of Economics. Professor Charlie is leading the Police Journalism AI project. He was lead commissioner for the London School of Economics Truth, Trust and Technology Commission, T3, as well as being spokesperson for Police, Media Policy Project and T3. Professor Charlie Beckett is a regular commentator on journalism and politics for the United Kingdom and international media. His books include Super Media, Saving Journalism so it can save the world, and WikiLeaks, News in the Networked Era. Professor Charlie was a senior producer and program editor at BBC News and Current Affairs for the 10 years, making documentaries and news programs at On the Record, Public Eye, Panorama, Breakfast News, and News 24, as well as producing the BBC's 1992 election documentary and the obituary film for Harold Wilson. Professor Charlie is a trustee of the European Journalism Centre and a consultant on media issues to a variety of commercial and public service organizations. Journalism AI, founded by Professor Charlie, is a global initiative that aims to inform media organizations about the potential offered by AI-powered technologies. Journalism AI offer research reports, training materials, a network for best practice, and innovation sharing. In November 2019, Journalism AI published New Powers, New Responsibilities, a global survey of journalism and artificial intelligence. The report suggests that AI is giving journalists significant new powers, but with those come editorial and ethical responsibilities. Professor Charlie Beckett takes us through the challenges with artificial intelligence in journalism. Welcome, Professor Charlie Beckett.
Hi there, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure and a privilege to be able to talk to everyone today.
Okay.
And would you like me just to carry on with the presentation?
Yeah, okay, sir, kindly.
Great. What I'm going to do is, you've given a wonderful introduction and you've heard from Professor Varma about AI in general. So I'm just going to talk you through the work that I'm doing with news organizations around the world, looking at what they're doing with AI. So I'm going to share my screen. Oops, share the screen. So I'm hoping you can all see the slides. Yes. And I'm going to talk you through, as was just mentioned, we published a report last year called New Powers and New Responsibilities, which was a survey of 70 news organizations around the world asking, what they are doing with AI, but also what they think about it and how they think it might change journalism. So that's kind of what I'm going to be looking at. And it's all based on the information and research that we've got by talking and working with those news organizations. Now, the first thing I want to say is that, as was mentioned by Professor Varma, AI is already here in many shapes: automation, algorithms, machine learning, data journalism. So you are already using AI when you make journalism or when you consume it. This is a great example from TikTok. I imagine many people listening to this are on TikTok and use TikTok. Well, so does the Washington Post. This is a journalist who's one of the pioneers of using TikTok to try and get people's attention, to distract people from those wonderful videos about dancing and football and makeup and so on, and get them to at least realize that there's something called the Washington Post that's creating journalism. And of course, TikTok has famously a ferocious algorithm that is personalized to make you pay attention to certain things and to give you the content that you want. So it's already here. Another great example, this is from a German news organization in Stuttgart. And if you click on there, on this map, it provides live information about crimes happening across the city of Stuttgart. It'll give you individual information on those incidents, and it all happens automatically. It's scraping data from police websites, and it's turning it into what is a very useful and quite attention-grabbing journalistic piece of content. It's not an article, it's an interactive map where you get live information. So again, a great example of AI in action, providing, in this case, I think, very useful factual information to people. When we talk about AI, as was mentioned by the previous speaker, there's a lot of sort of hype, and in fact, there's a lot of fear around AI. And with journalism, there's this idea that the robots are going to come and take our jobs. And here's one example of a so-called robot, an algorithm in action, where it went wrong. This was a story in the UK where the British government had asked the exam authority to use an algorithm to grade students. And this is because with the pandemic, the students weren't able to take their exams in person, so the results were based on their previous record and what teachers had recommended. And it was a dreadful mistake because it ended up being really unfair on some very talented students who happened to be in areas where grades traditionally weren't so good, and they got marked down. And as you can see, the headlines were full of anger about this algorithm. But of course, the important thing to remember was that that algorithm was programmed by human beings. They told it what to do. And it was politicians, in fact, who established the parameters for that algorithm. And so in the end, it was humans, and in this case, I think politicians, who were responsible for the bad publicity that the robots or the algorithm got. Here's an example, again, very exciting, but also a little bit controversial and interesting. This was an article in the Guardian news organization. It was written by GPT-3, which I think you've already had mentioned, which is this powerful new language generator. You feed it information and you ask it to write something. It could be poetry or advertising. In this case, they asked a robot or the algorithm to explain who they were. And again, it was very entertaining. If you read the story, it's quite a good article. But the headline is very misleading. It says a robot wrote this entire article. Are you scared yet, human? Well, it was actually, of course, software that was programmed by humans. They told it what to do. And then when the software created the article was then edited by human beings. They put it together, much as you would edit an article written by a normal journalist. So it's a great example of the potential of AI, but also the kind of myth making that goes on around it, especially when it's involved with journalism. And again, as Professor Varma mentioned, we don't really have this idea of AI as some sort of super godlike thing that can think for itself and act entirely independently. That is still in the future. It may never happen. In some ways, it's better to think of AI as a load of washing machines. It's a load of programs that do very specific tasks using data, usually to predict things, to work out what comes next, what happens next. And so that's really important when you think about AI in journalism. It's not a kind of magic. It's not going to solve all our problems. It's complicated and it's quite hard work to make it work. So as I mentioned, before the pandemic hit us and we did all this work remotely, we spent a lot of time and still do, talking with journalists about how they were using AI, and created this report that you can download. It's actually very easy to read, and it's packed full of information and explanation about how AI works in journalism. And as was mentioned in the introduction, we were struck by how many things a new technology could do, but we were also made very aware of the new responsibilities, the choices that people have to make when they use the AI. And why would you do it? Well, this is what the news organizations told us. They said that it would make the journalists' work more efficient. They said it would help, and this is really important, to deliver more relevant content to users. And that's probably one of the biggest challenges facing journalism. We have so many news sources out there. How do we get our content to the right people in the right time, in the right format? And then finally, they were motivated by the idea of improving business efficiency. AI is quite expensive, it's quite complicated, but the hope is that it can do things very fast, it can do things at scale, and it can do things repeatedly. So it can make your business more efficient. And with the whole economic challenge facing the world, but especially the news media, again, that's really important. It's very important to understand that AI isn't just about one part of journalism. It's not just about, for example, writing stories. It has an influence on news gathering, where we get our information, where we get our material to make that content. It has an impact on that news production when you are actually writing the story or making a video. And finally, it has an impact on how people get the journalism that you create, how it's personalized, how perhaps, for example, with a newsletter, it can be tailored to suit your particular interests. And because AI impacts on all aspects of journalism, we have to think of it as systematic, it's structural. It's not just a tool that you bolt on to what you're doing. You have to think about how you do things. Now, this slide is a bit boring, but it's basically taken from our website. And if you want to know how AI is being used in loads of different ways in the world, click on our website and go to the case studies section, where there are literally hundreds of examples of AI in action. And the point I'm trying to get across with this slide is that there are so many different aspects, all the way from ethics to investigations, to personalization, to fact checking, and also to education and training for journalists as well. So again, when we think about AI, it's really important not to just think of one particular use case or one particular aspect of the technology. To investigate this further, we put together, as part of our journalism project at the LSE, we put together what we call the CoLab challenges. We've got 5 teams of journalists, including one from India, who chose a particular challenge that they thought AI could help them with in their work. And I'm going to take you through them quickly, just to, again, it shows the variety of what you can do with this technology, but it also shows you the innovation that journalists are trying to create. One of the team was looking at the idea of newsroom biases. We're all much more aware that newsrooms have biases. And by that, I mean, political bias, ethnic bias, ideological bias, but also we have a bias, for example, around the news agenda. Journalists create stories because they're interested. But are we biased when we do that? Do we ignore things? Do we ignore people? For example, gender bias. Do we have enough women being quoted in our stories? Do we do enough stories about women? So can you use AI to monitor what you're doing, to point out those biases, and to help you correct them? So that's what one of the team's doing. The second team is doing a much more sort of crunchy thing. They're looking at when you're a journalist writing a story, where do you get your information? Where do you get the sources to put that together? So they're going to try and use AI to create automated related content, so that as you're writing that story, it will make suggestions, it will tell you what you've written before, it will offer other sources that can enhance what you're doing. Team 3 are doing something related, which is they're looking for evergreen content, content that is timeless. But in this case, they're looking at the audience or the reader, so that when you click on a story, it can make suggestions for other stories, perhaps from the past, that will perhaps give you more context, or will give you a particular angle that's special to you, perhaps where you live. And again, they want to try and do this in an automated way. And it's very complex. You don't just create a bit of software and off it runs. You have to think through how you're going to create the metadata that enables that. What kind of choices are you going to make to shape the way that the algorithm works? Team 4 were looking at a way of trying to use recommendations to readers when you're personalizing content. It could be a newsletter, or it could be an app. How do you give people the kind of news that interests them? So they were looking at content recommendation. And the last team were looking at the kind of business model end of it, if you like. They were thinking, well, how can we use AI to improve the user experience? And the idea would be, of course, you want people to consume more of your news, but you also want them to stay with you. You want them to subscribe to your news service, pay you money, and you want them to keep subscribed. So how can you use automation or machine learning to understand what interests people and to keep them hooked? And one of the ideas they came up with was to create a kind of game around it. So you might get points or gold stars if you read content, or if you share content, or if you comment. And that would make it into a much more engaging experience for the reader. So you can see they're coming up with all sorts of clever ideas, and they've done it very collaboratively. They're all from very different news organizations, big ones, small ones, right across the world, from Argentina to Hong Kong. And part of the process has been to understand, how, not just how these programs might work, or how these tools might work, but how might they fit into the newsroom overall. And that's because, as I said, AI has a systematic impact, and therefore you have to have a strategy. When something's systematic, you have to have a strategic approach to using it. And as it turned out, when we asked in the survey, it turned out that 2/3 of news organizations haven't really created an AI strategy. Only about 1/3 of them have some sort of systematic approach. And so we thought that's really important, because our survey also showed that there are some real strategic challenges to AI adoption. This isn't just flicking a switch or buying a program. There's a real problem in the news media of a lack of resources. Money is tight. Can people spend on the R&D? There's a real problem of lack of skills. If you're a clever data scientist, who do you want to go and work for? Do you want to go and work for the Times of India, or do you want to go and work for Google and earn loads of money? There was also this cultural problem. There was a kind of skepticism towards the technology, and a fear of losing jobs. And as I've suggested, I don't think there is much chance of a robot taking an individual journalist's job, but certainly it's going to, the technology is going to be doing a lot of the boring, repetitive work that journalists do at the moment. And also it does mean that journalists are going to have to learn new skills. They're going to have to, they don't have to learn how to program or code, but they do have to learn how to use these new tools. They have to learn how to edit the algorithm, in fact. So lots of problems around knowledge and understanding and strategy. And we try to address that. So we've created a series of training courses. One of them is a strategic training course that gives you a very simple guide to what you should be thinking about when you're thinking of using AI in your news organization. And this was aimed at managers particularly, but I think every journalist should be thinking about this, because AI is coming to them. And again, with that in mind, we created this course, which is an introduction to machine learning in particular. And this was a course that was created by journalists with us, and it's aimed at all journalists and journalism students, and it only takes an hour to go through, but it gives you a sense of what machine learning does, and how it can change the way that you do your journalism. And we've had, I think, nearly 40,000 people have already downloaded this course. So it's obviously popular, and it obviously does a job that's really important. Everyone who's going to work in journalism should know something about machine learning, and this course helps you on that. And just thinking, for the next 5 minutes before I end, just thinking ahead, I think one of the things that struck me is that AI is really going to change the whole structure and culture of journalism. It's not just going to be business as usual. There is this huge demand for education and training. And it also is going to mean a lot more collaboration. It means collaboration within the newsroom. The journalists are going to have to talk to the tech people. They're going to have to talk to the marketing people. This is a systematic technology, so you have to collaborate across the old departmental lines. But it also opens up all sorts of potential for collaboration between news organizations. We've seen that, for example, with big global investigations that have happened where news organizations have collaborated on the technology, because it is complicated, and it works better when you work together with other people who've got the skills. And also collaboration with, well, people like the LSE, news organizations working with universities or technology companies or startups to try and learn lessons and make the most of the innovative possibilities of the AI. So I think that's really interesting, and it goes against the usual culture of journalism, which is very competitive and very independent. And I think that kind of collaboration is very much the way forward for the industry. As a project, we're continuing this year and next year. We'll be creating more training courses. We're going to be releasing a training course very soon, which will teach you how to actually to train data and to use it on a specific journalistic task. We're going to continue with this collaborative experiment. We've got a network of about 1,500 journalists who are signed up. You just go to our website and sign up, and you get a regular newsletter about AI and journalism. And then finally, in December, we've got what we're calling a Journalism AI Festival, very much like what we're enjoying right now here. In December, we're going to have a week-long series of events where people will be talking about the work they're doing and their ideas about how journalism goes forward. I just want to end, for those people out there who are journalism students, the whole point about the AI for me is that it can superpower the human journalist. It's not there to replace the human, it's there to give them more powers, more capabilities. And the human element is going to be actually more important, because if the machines can do all this stuff automatically, then the thing that will make you stand out as a news organization is going to be that human element. And Professor Varma, I think, referred to this. When I started as a journalist back in 1986, in the previous century, of course, this was kind of what a journalist looked like. It was a human being wandering around the world, reporting on things and telling people about that. And I think that doesn't change. That's still very much at the heart of journalism. It looks different. That was what my office looked like. We had typewriters, and telephones were connected to a wall with a bit of wire. You could even smoke at your desk, and we didn't have mobile phones or the internet. So the technology has changed, but the human element, I think, is absolutely vital. And I won't go through this in detail, but this is my final slide, which says this is what at the heart of a good journalist. It's these 3 C's. You know, you've got to have the curiosity. You've got to have commitment. It's a tough job, and often people don't want you to do it. You have to have creativity. You have to think about whether you're doing your journalism in the best possible way. You have to have that content. You have to have something to say, something to report upon. something to show people. And you have to be critical. You have to think for yourself. You have to reflect on what you're doing and why you're doing it and learn from mistakes. And finally, and this comes back to the technology, you have to understand the information systems that you're using. You have to understand the world that is going to be more driven by these new technologies so that you can report on that world. And you have to use all the tools possible to be competitive and to get attention. So it's really important that you're aware of those trends. So the technology is important, the technology is exciting, but in the end, it's going to be about the human beings. So that's an outline of how I see AI in journalism and the future of journalism as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Charlie Beckett, for the great session. Now we shall take few questions from the participants. My colleague Nino PK shall moderate the question and answer session.
Hello, sir. I'm Nino, and I'll be moderating the question and answer session. So
Great.
Shall we begin?
Please, go ahead.
Thank you. So this is our first question. In the new generation content development, don't you think having a beginning, middle, and end will not be sufficient? We need a climax too. Can AI help in developing a climax? This question is by Shahjan.
Thanks, Shahjan. I'm not quite sure what you mean by climax, but if you mean impact, if you mean in the same way that we have, for example, a headline on a news story, the whole point of that is to shout at the reader, pay attention to this. Or when you're making a piece of video, you'll have some really exciting imagery at the beginning of that to grab people's attention and to get them engaged and to draw them in. Well, I think that's precisely what AI can do. Literally there are programs out there that, for example, do A/B testing on headlines. They work out which headlines, which variation of the wording, for example, or which images are going to get most attention. They look at what people click on and they can adjust it to optimize, if you like, the climax for people, the excitement about news. So in fact, the AI is very good. In fact, you could almost say it's too good at it. There's a danger that if you rely too much on the AI, it will always, if it's programmed that way, it will just go for the sensational. And I think we all realize that there's a danger in of creating kind of misleading or exaggerated journalism if you just rely on the climax. I hope that helps.
Okay, thank you for that answer. So we will move on to the next question. This is our next question. If you gamify content, isn't that indirectly persuading users to maybe share news that is not favorable?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think what you're getting at there is a much bigger issue, which is if you just give people what grabs their attention, or if you encourage people to share things purely to get attention, then the danger is you are going to end up with the equivalent of what we call clickbait. And I think the real experience is that over time, people don't appreciate that. So the news organizations I talk to, they don't program their algorithms, including the gamification, wouldn't just be programmed for please maximize the sharing or just maximize the clicks. They were looking at this, they were asking exactly the same question that you would have asked, which is how do you encourage people to look at other bits of your journalism? So it might be you want to encourage them to look at longer stories or stories about topics that don't get much attention. So it might be that you reward people not just for sharing lots of content, but for perhaps reading something that's a bit more unusual. or a bit different to their usual diet. It's a bit like with a kid, anybody that's got kids, you don't just feed them chocolate all the time because they're going to end up sick and they're going to end up very unhealthy. And so you can try and design these algorithms to be healthy, to give people a healthier news diet. As Professor Varma said, humans program the software. It doesn't just grow on trees. And so you can program it according to your editorial or ethical principles. And of course, it's really important then to go back and see, well, what actually happens when we had that personalized newsletter? What did people click on? Did it work? Did it have the impact that we thought it would? So it's really important to go back and review how the algorithms, how the machine learning is actually working in practice. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, sir. So we will move on to the next question. So this is our next question. How do you see AI in low-income countries, as it is already expensive and will take journalist jobs?
That's another really good question. One of the things that's become really obvious to us with doing this project is there are lots of real inequalities around AI, not just in journalism. There are big companies who can afford to use the AI in a sophisticated way, and those big companies tend to be in very rich places. I mean, India has a very thriving technology sector, but even within that country, is that evenly distributed? Are the local news organizations, the smaller news organizations, are they able to use this technology as well? So I think that's a really important question. What can you do about it? Well, we're trying to do something with our project. We're trying to make sure that the knowledge is shared, that we come up with tools that can be replicated easily. And I think we're going to see that over time, that we are going to see products that are cheaper and easier for all news organizations to use. But certainly there's a real danger of a kind of digital divide. On the bit about journalist jobs, I don't think it's particularly a problem. Say, for example, you're in a local news organization. That's actually a really great example of where the human element is absolutely vital. You know your particular neighborhood or your city, and you understand the people, you understand the particular issues of that place in a way that a machine will always find different. Now, we've seen some fantastic AI applications for local news as well. But in the end, I think this is going to sound brutal, but if a machine can do a job, then you have to ask, why is a human doing it in the first place? There are a load of jobs that we used to do with human beings. But if you can get a machine to do it, isn't it better that we use that machine and the human being can go and do something more interesting and more valuable?
Okay, so thank you for that answer. So we'll move on to the next question. So this is the next question. Won't bias in the data sets used to train AI algorithms lead to bias in their output? How can it be addressed?
Well, the answer to this is yes, and we're working on it. In the sense, of course, any set of data is biased by its characteristics, where it came from, who created it, and the algorithm involved. And of course, journalists have to be aware of that. And of course, you can do something about it. The first thing is to be aware of it, to ask yourself, where did the data come from? Now, journalists should be good at this. We should be asking this question of every source that we have. And we haven't, frankly. In the past, we've been very deferential. We just accept information that's given to us, even if it's biased. We are not critical enough about thinking, is there a bias inherent in this person who's talking to me? do I have a bias as a journalist because of my background or my education or my political views or just what interests me? So I think thinking about bias is a very creative and useful thing to do. And it's not just about the software and the machine learning. And in fact, as I suggested in my presentation, it may be that the machines, if you like, can help correct human biases as well. So it's a really good question to ask. We should be asking it every day. And indeed, this is not just about journalism, of course, where I think there's a bigger problem in other industries, actually. I think there's a huge problem around, for example, facial recognition. There's a huge problem around personal profiling in the recruitment of people, for example. There's huge potential problems around using machine learning in things like insurance. So I think that for journalism, it's possibly not such a big problem or such an insoluble problem. We're supposed to be a profession that's good at being critical and thoughtful about information. So we should apply that to AI.
Thank you, sir. Actually, we are getting a lot of questions from the participants, but due to time constraints, we are forced to move on to the last question of the session. So this is our last question. What about editorial policies injected in boards? How would you counter the argument that AI-driven news are more authentic?
I'm not quite sure what this question is getting at. I mean, I think that if it's around the use of kind of bots or automated news, and if you like, trust, I think it is important that you're transparent, that you don't create journalism without telling people how you've done it. So you shouldn't pretend, for example, that an article has been written by a journalist when in fact it's been generated automatically. And we have to, as I said earlier, edit the algorithm. We shouldn't just unleash a bot and let it go about its work without checking what kind of impact it's having, not just in case it makes mistakes or if it's biased, but is it effective? And so in that sense, I think, and again, I think this is something that journalism should do anyway. You know, we should be transparent about our sources. We should be transparent when we make mistakes and correct them openly. We should be transparent and ask the reader what they think. What have they enjoyed? Do they think they're getting the news that they want? And again, AI can help us with this. You know, it can help us understand how people consume our news and whether they trust us. It can help us understand how we can build credibility, how we can reduce misinformation that we might be generating ourselves. So I think it's a good question to ask, you know, about the authenticity or the accountability of our journalism. And in the end, that's a human judgment. I mean, there's some fantastic journalism in India at the moment, but there's also a lot of terrible journalism, much like there is around the world. So I think these are kind of ethical questions that we should be asking ourselves generally, not just about the technology. And I'd just like to say as well that if there are other questions that people have, or if they're interested, then, you know, please contact me or go and look at our Journalism AI website. There's loads of information on there. There's loads of blogs on there. And of course, you're very welcome to sign up to our newsletter, which may provide you with answers to further questions as well.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for answering all the questions. I'm sure the participants will try to contact you to get answers for their questions that we couldn't include in this session. So thank you so much. So that is the end of our question and answer session. Now I'll hand over the mic to Manju ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Charlie, for sharing the vision of journalism, AI, and making us understand how AI technologies can benefit newsrooms. While journalists have access to powerful AI tools, they also have the responsibility to use it ethically and the cause of good journalism. As you said, transparency, truth, credibility, honesty, that should rule the world of journalism. Thank you very much for joining this summit. We look forward to having you for our future training sessions. Thank you once again.